Welcome to the Great African Leadership Series, where we feature great inspirational speeches and quotes from African leaders.
African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Gamal Abdel Nasser were prevailing over Western colonialism and showing a bold and articulate face of Africa to the entire world. It was indeed a face and sentiment which mirrored that of the spirit and ethos of the great school during those years. Monumental change suddenly became possible, and Africans were its catalyst. We felt strongly that we could, we should, and would play individual role in bringing about the changes we dreamt of. A mere 3 years after Ghana's independence, 17 more African nations were granted independence in 1960. Our little country had been the trailblazer. In Swahili, there is a proverb. They say that there is no sea without waves. In our modern history, the sea of change in Africa has been marked by several momentous waves in political, economic, and social progress. In 1960 was the first wave. It was a year when the world recognized the growing vitality of African identity and aspirations. That vitality was tangible as post-colonial governments sought to unify the strength of the independence movements through consolidation of political and economic powers. Our continent seemed on the cusp of a promising future in which we Africans would be the masters of our destiny after decades of colonial rule. But as the tide rises, the tide too falls. After a promising start, Africa was hit by a second wave exacerbated by the Cold War. The rival superpowers sided with various regimes and rebel movements, fueling a string of proxy wars in which, in some cases, prolonging existing conflicts or creating new ones. Our continent became a battlefield characterized by civil wars, tyrannical military rule, human rights violations, and deep economic stagnation. This political context fueled corruption, decreased food production, and massive indebtedness due to huge trade imbalances, economic mismanagement, and the squander of resources. Above all, basic human rights, the rights for which Africans had struggled against colonialism, were trampled by most colonial regimes. Thankfully, when the Cold War came to an end, it ushered in a new period of hope for Africa. After an initial period of instability, as the continent regained its autonomy, we witnessed a third wave of change. Many Cold War-influenced civil wars came to an end, and democracy gained ground, and more African governments were democratically elected. By the end of the millennium, donors had forgiven much of the burden of debt that has saddled our countries for decades. By and large, governments across the continent improved their economic management capacity by the early 2000s. With the economy managed better, private investment boomed in many countries, and coupled with transfers from the diaspora, it gradually eclipsed foreign aid. Together, we set a global development agenda and goals such as achieving universal education, fighting preventable diseases, and improving safe drinking water, and made huge strides in these areas. This combination of changes set the stage for rapid aggregate economic growth of 5 to 6% for 15 years across the continent from the turn of the millennium, and 40% fall in extreme poverty since 1990. But we cannot rest on our laurels. I'm afraid I sense a fourth wave is gathering momentum. The period of fast economic growth came to an end in 2014 with the fall of commodity prices, and we discovered that the fruits of growth, the revenues, had not been invested wisely. We also realized that the continent still remained over-reliant on its raw materials despite years of talk at the regional and national level of the importance of reducing this dependence. The crisis also revealed that previous economic growth had not been inclusive and had in fact exacerbated the deep inequalities that characterize our continent. Alarmingly, the economic picture is mirrored by the political one. Many countries seem to be backsliding on democratic gains. A growing number of presidents are changing their constitutions and subverting elections to remain in power indefinitely. According to international watchdogs, democratic freedoms seem to be in retreat on our continent. Although governments organize elections, many lack integrity. Elections with integrity confer legitimacy on the winners and offers protection to the losers. And many elections have paradoxically exacerbated identity politics as unscrupulous politicians pander to ethnic and religious grievances and prejudices to mobilize voters in their favor. These developments are all the more serious given the size and expectation of our youth population. African population will grow to 2 billion by 2050 and 4 billion by the end of the century. This demographic boom can be a blessing or a curse, depending on the policies we adopt. I'm less optimistic today, although the pessimism of the intellect must be tempered by the optimism of willpower. Dear friends, we are at crossroads. The period of fast growth is over for the foreseeable future. Many of our countries squandered the opportunities that this period, or what some call the super cycle for commodity prices, provided, and today we have no choice but to pursue reform in straitened circumstances. The decisions we take today, both in government, in business, and civil society, will determine whether the continent can ride the fourth wave successfully. We cannot fail to meet our youth's aspiration with opportunity. More than ever, our future is in our hands. A bright African future is one that requires Africa's people as central agents. We must ride the wave that began long ago at independence to come together to affirm the way forward for the continent. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you an enjoyable afternoon. Thank you.
Share this video with friends and family to support the channel.